2 introductions. First of all, when Yossi walked in, he sat over there, and I told him you should sit over here, because I'd rather you talk rather than just listen. If you sit over there, it's like a big thing to lecture, and you're going to listen, and if you sit over here, then you'll schmooze. I'd rather that. The second is, I intend to give out as we go along, including today, different things, some of which, or many of which will come from documents written in a previous life. And our understanding with the OU is that even though they've given me personal copies of documents, I have no permission to give those documents out unless I have specifically asked permission. So if I give you something, it's because I've asked permission from them beforehand to give it out.
Therefore, we shouldn't be enforcing it.
Well, it's not meant to be publicized over the whole world, but yet it was given we asked permission, and we are able to give it out, but it's not meant for plastering over the world. Okay, and what we're going to do is just B'derech Klal, and we're not going to give out things until the end, just to not distract you, so you can pay attention instead of reading. Okay, the first thing, which we'll cover as much as we can of it, really is not directly related to Hagol Scale and Tafel Now. Keilim Cheress. Cheress made out of Cheress, that use Chametz in it the whole year. Even those that you cooked in them, meaning kinds of porridges and things with a lot of Chametz to it, to which the point is there's tremendous amount of Bli in the Kli. All you have to do is you clean them off well, to make sure there's no chametz left on top of them, no obvious chametz on them. And then you could keep them till after Pesach and use them after Pesach. Where does this thing come from? There's a machlokes from the Gemara as to whether there's Bal Yirah and whether there's chametz of the Pesach on the blia that's in the kli. So this thing is telling us that we paskin that Bal Yirah is only for things that you could see, only things that are tangible and that are on the outside of a kli. So as long as you get rid of the be'en on the outside of the kli, you don't have to get rid of the blias. There's no Bal Yirah on them, and there's no chametz over Pesach on those blias that are in the list. The point of this thing.
According to the design, it should be alright.
That's a separate question. That's really Hilchos Pesach, not for Hagol Scale. The Ramah says that the Ramah in Tafnim Zayin, Mishmur brings that the Ramah says in Tafnim Zayin that this din is not only if it went in before Pesach, it's even if it went in on Pesach. I mean, even though the chametz was, you already over on Bal Yirah for that chametz. Again, once it's belua, there's no concern. And the last thing is that if the Mishmur brings down also that if you had forgot to clean the kli, you're supposed to clean it before Pesach. If you forgot to clean the kli before Pesach, and you realize on Pesach that there's a dirty chalm pot in the bottom of your then you're supposed to clean it out even on Pesach. You're supposed to clean it on Pesach like you do regular beer chametz. You have chametz on the kli, and you have to get rid of it like any other chametz. Okay. Next. Now what's the next part of it? Umatzniim b'Pesach b'makom tzenua, and you put them away on Pesach in a private place, she'ein rogel leilacham, in a place where you wouldn't usually go to, so you won't end up by mistake using them on Pesach. And it's good to lock them up or close them up in a room and to hide the key. And the Bach says that this comes from the Gemara says that if a guy has his chametz in your house, you're supposed to put a mechitza of 10 tefachim in front of it. So, as an outgrowth of that din, this is not a Gemara, but this is an outgrowth of that din is you should also put it up into a thing and lock it up, or we tape it up or something like that. Okay, there's some child, Pesach child, just mentioned. One of the childs in my home is, can you put up a kli that was not kasher? This is the kli that was not kasher. Can you take a kli that was not kasher and put it where it's out of reach? There's no way that you're going to possibly use it. You put it on the top of your brake fund when no one's going to possibly reach it. That's one child. According to what's the shell.
Yeah, I share the
to use it, to take chametz kli, put it on top of it. It says here you're supposed to lock it up that you won't by mistake use it. So, child, can you put it just out of reach, but it's still there? It's still accessible. This is tight. The whole din is just a type. The whole din is not a chiyuv. That's one machlokes, and one is the opposite machlokes. What else? If you want to take your Pesach dishes and put them on display year round. Okay, that's the opposite. Could you put you have a kara? Okay, it's a big fancy kara. Can you put that up someplace just because you like the way it looks? Can you put that up? Well, maybe a kara nobody would use it in here, but something else that you might by mistake use.
So what is that all?
Shal asked me that yesterday.
Whether you're allowed to put a paper.
She has her friends in China, Pesach China.
So I don't remember. I think the Mishnah Berurah is better not to. I don't
Really?
know.
It's a real shell.
It's Machlik Mechorim.
This is like a Xer, you know? I mean, maybe I'm going to use it for Chametz, then I'll forget again and use it for Pesach.
So that's the task to be maker, because it says I'd have to do two things wrong. I have to first of all forget it on during the year, and then forget about it back on Pesach. It's a bachan task. I can look at it. It wasn't again, so I left it on the Okay, and then one more thing, or before we get to the Hagol scaling part of this, is that the Mishnah Berurah at the end of Taf Nun.
Are these notes new?
This is my own note. I don't know if
you had beforehand.
No, this is
new.
And the Mishnah Berurah at the end of Taf Nun says that if you have a kli that you use for chametz, but you never use it for food. His example, you make shampoo, you wash your dishes or wash your clothes in this bowl and use it for chametz. So that kli, even though it has bleeds of chametz, you're allowed to keep that kli around because there's no concern anybody would use it for food. If you use it for both, use it to wash your clothes and to cook up food, then you wouldn't be allowed to keep it around.
You're washing clothes hot.
You wash your clothes, hot. You put it in and you use some kind of a chametz sticker, soap to it or whatever it is. So then you're allowed to, you're allowed
washes clothes hot nowadays.
Who washes clothes hot?
Yeah.
So the Basal Challah shine with the thing, right?
No.
You can have a Basal Challah.
You have a washing machine.
That's how you use that water, my friend.
No, the washing machine itself. You talking about?
Okay, well that's...
They used to wash it.
Did you see the big bowl?
Yeah, but you think they would use really hot water? Yeah?
Marshal and Basal Challah, they do something if you do the Basal Challah.
Okay, so now that we finished with the Pesach part of it, there's two things that I want to talk about, and the one is like this. There's an implied din over here. It says here we had Kedera Shel Cheress. So we took a Kedera made out of Cheress. If you kasher it, if you don't kasher it, you should leave it around, and how you could leave it around, you have to lock it up. Why does it say Kedera of Cheress? Because the Mishnah Berurah points out, because a normal kli you're going to kasher. They weren't as rich as we are, so your regular pots and pans you kasher them and use them for Pesach. There's no shayla about using them to use those on that you wouldn't have them on Pesach. But Cheress Keilim you can't kasher, so Mamela you have to say, well, what do I do with these Keilim? So I think Rav says you have to get rid of them. You have to throw them out. You have to break them before Pesach because they're going to be valuable. And Rav and Shmuel, which says that no, you can keep them around, which is the din that you can keep them around. So this is a place, or one of the few places that the Mechaber mentions the din that, or implies the din that Cheress can't be kasher. Okay, so I wanted to mention a few examples of that, of where that comes up. I know three places. There are probably more three places in industrial equipment where Cheress is possible. Cheress, we're talking about here, is the straight out Cheress, the ceramic, like you'd find in a coffee mug. I know three places where it is. The first, so for this, I'll give you a picture for this one. In this is a picture. If you could just not read the document, just look at the picture for that.
The picture's 1,000 words, you know.
We're going to have to look on together.
This place has to be talking about hot.
That was used for hot, yes. If you could look at the picture on the second page, okay? A homogenizer, if you have to share, because I don't have enough for both of you. You can keep it. A homogenizer, look at the second page. On the second page, a homogenizer has got this huge piece of equipment, okay? And the bulk of the homogenizer is just a pump. I'm sorry, is a motor to turn a bunch of pistons, and the pistons bang on the product, and by banging on it so much, it breaks into tiny particles, which does two things. It makes into tiny particles, helps it mix well, so it homogenizes it, but it also serves as a pump also. And in some companies, they'll use the homogenizer just as a pump. Even though it's there to theoretically be homogenizing, they'll use it just around. It's a great pump. It's a very strong pump because it bangs itself up and it pushes it the reason why it's so huge is because of the motor to bang those pistons. Okay, so there's usually 3-4 pistons that are in there hitting against the product. Those pistons have to be something that can handle the kind of product that's being pushed through. So the derech klal in food applications, you're going to see just stainless steel. Okay, because that's what's fine for food applications. For things that are more corrosive, they can use ceramic. Ceramic is not more corrosive. If the product that's going through is a chemical, usually not for a food product, their ceramic is very weak. I mean, you could break it with your hand with a light hammer, banging on it, but it's strong against fighting corrosion. So most typically, those pistons will will be stainless steel, and usually it would only be ceramic in a case where it's a not food application, like a chemical kind of application. But there's no rules of these things, and it's easy enough. The cover, come out every case, you can lift it up and look in and see the pistons. So when you pass the homogenizers, you'd have to just lift it up, and the pistons are usually pretty obvious. You could see parts of the piston. You don't see the part where it actually hits the food, but the part where it says number 5 over here, you could usually see that part where the pistons go back and forth.
If it's white, then it's ceramic.
Yeah, the white is usually ceramic, and the stainless steel looks like stainless steel. Okay, we found out this information. Shalom and I were sitting at this class, and everybody was falling asleep while the Fed drayed on and on and on and on about homogenizers. And then he said something like about, so we can make the pistons out of stainless steel or ceramic. It was like the whole room woke up, like everybody woke up, everybody having I was falling asleep. It was a very boring speech. But anyhow, okay, that's one thing. Okay,
everyone was from in the room.
Yes.
Oh,
By the way, usually the marginalized are cold. So the question that
it's not necessarily true. Okay, two things. First of all, because depending on where in the line they put them, often in a hot place, and the homogenizer itself builds up heat in the product. Okay, in a flavor company that
by the way, it doesn't have its own heat. Okay.
Right, but it builds up heat through friction.
I find them more and more. I find that the newer homogenizer, they try to put in the ceramic.
They really? Try to put in the ceramic?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's at least what I found them a couple places, and then someone that knows the industry says that, especially the stuff coming from Europe, the later ones, like Rich just recently put in something that had ceramic.
Okay, so it's something that's worth looking at. It takes a second to look at it, to lift up a little cover and look. Don't stick your hands in there, but just stick up a little cover and you can see it. It's usually easy enough to find it. In the flavor company that we were both at, they use the homogenizer in a cold place, but we had questions here that because if it's warm, the homogenizer adds heat to the thing. Just by the friction of it, adds heat to it. So we were never Mavara, but it would be worth being Mavara. That maybe adds enough to push it over being outside this way. The company is working more. What? Then we'd have to download it. What is it? That's for halacha. I don't remember which halacha. One of the late halacha.
What does it mean when you say it fights against corrosion?
Oh, the metal can get ruined by a corrosive liquid. But a ceramic can handle it. So they would use that in the right kind of application. They use the ceramic. So it's stronger.
So ceramic can handle better
corrosion that metal cannot. That's correct.
And the corrosion is coming from the product.
From the product. So if you have the right kind of product, the wrong kind of product going through, then you want to have that.
Against the metal, it's not a good ceramic.
Correct. Okay. The second place is there's something called distillation column. In Mirz Hashem, we're going to do distillation columns when we get to the end of, if we ever get to the end of Tufman Bays. Okay, that's where it belongs, distillation column, the end of Tufman Bays. But in the distillation column, in particular in the juice plants, they have something called packing. Okay, which means whatever the point of it is, there's a liquid dripping through tiny little pieces that look something like this. Okay, it happens to be that the ones that I have here are all round. They don't always have this shape. Okay, the point is that the liquid drips through something that has many surfaces. Okay, so these are just different examples of how you get a lot of surfaces. So what they'll have is they'll have the column, it's this tall pillar filled with 10,000 of these. Okay, and all the chokmah goes into knowing which piece of packing to put into this thing. The ones that you're using here are metal and plastic, but they can also be made out of ceramic. And again, the ceramic they will also be, depending on the kind of liquid you want to put through, will depend if you want to put metal or ceramic. Okay, so that's a second place where you could have. That I know of, that you could have ceramic.
Is this a pasteurizer?
This is a distillation column for recovering essence from juices. That's where it's been found. Is in the distillation column for essence. We're going to that whole parasha. I don't know if you've ever seen it. We'll do it at the end of the talk.
Girls.
They use a distillation column. I'm not familiar. I'm not sure. Okay, maybe what you mean is the last thing, which is the third thing that I know is ceramic could also be used to filter things, and the reason why it filters it is exactly why it can't be kosher, because it's so porous. Okay, it holds so much blee into it that you can't get the blee out of it. That's what the Gemara explains the pasuk, and it has. So the way they use a ceramic filter. This is from I'm sorry, I only have one of each of these. This is from a juice filter. That's what this is from. This picture. In this case, if I remember correctly, the juice goes through the holes in the center, and it gets pushed into the middle, and it just forces its way through the ceramic. The juice literally sucks out right through the ceramic, and any garbage that's left in the juice gets stuck behind. Only the liquid can pass through the ceramic, and leaves all the solids behind it. Okay, so it's a way of filtering juice. This is this is a different kind of picture just of how it works. Here's going from the outside in. The stuff goes in, and the stuff has different kinds of layers that the junk stays on the outside, and only the end can go. Only the liquid, the more liquid you can go.
They say that household filter is from carbon. Is that
right?
Is that Cheress?
No, that's not Cheress. That's halacha dal zayin oches. No, it's just right out of the ground. But this is mamish real. The thing is pure. It's ceramic, and it wouldn't be one. What you do for juice, you'd have hundreds of these sitting together, and all the juice would be forced through these holes, either from the outside in or from the inside out, whichever way. And the ceramic acts as a filter to keep it in.
So that's the size of it.
This is the size of one. In this case, that's the size of one. Right, but there'd be 50 of them. And the juice is being forced through all these things to make a. Okay. Now another shalos we're talking about now is machlokes and whether plastic should be treated as Cheress. Okay, we know what Cheress is, but there's whether plastic should be or should not be. What's the shalos? Obviously, plastic is not Cheress. It's not Cheress. So the Achron had two very opposite ways of looking at it. Some of them, starting with Henkin, said that the Torah says Cheress can't be kashered, but everything else can be kashered. That's the only thing you can't. And Cheress and glass is a type of Cheress. We'll get to that. But Cheress can't be kashered. Everything else can be kashered. So unless we have some special reason to think that, we can kasher. And Ramosha and many on the other side held just the opposite. They said the Torah tells us what can be kashered. It tells us certain exceptions, but whatever tells us you can kasher, you can kasher. If you come up with a new material, then we have no idea. So you can't kasher. So it's the exact opposite way of looking at that shot. And there's as you well know, it's a big machlokes in the placement as to which way to do it. In Eretz Yisrael, they meko. In the American hashkachas, as a rule, are meko, except for one, are all meko. And just the oddity is that most American rabbis who advise their congregation, what they do, will say like what Moshe says, which would be common. What? So the most American rabbis will advise their people that you should not kasher plastic. So it's a funny situation that the hashkachas do kasher plastic, but that's the way it's worked out. Okay, you could talk about that afterwards. Okay, now there's just an interesting child just worth mentioning.
Who is that one?
We'll talk about it afterwards. The Dayan Weiss he says I'll tell you what, he says you should be makel. He says it's the suffix whether it's Cheress or not. So we always kasher when saying the binyama. So we should say something to Abaron L'Kula. We should say something to Abaron L'Kula. That's one of his sources why it should be kasher.
So, why don't we just say look at the material and see if it's toilet or not?
Okay. The answer, that's a good question. The answer to that question is really when we talk about glass, which is in glass that's exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. Most of us said we looked at the material and we think it doesn't have any bleas, and the Ashkenazi mini is the machmer, and we say no. We go to another place, even so we still choshesh that has bleas. So it happens to be this. There's a bunch of answers. I'm not saying that you need to answer this question, but I'm just worth mentioning the possible answers. One is a shalos niskalgo. It started off as a shalos deraisa. The belief that's in there was a deraisa, and it only now turned into Rabbanon because it's in the binyama. And there's a shalos in which cases do you treat that as a suffix Rabbanon l'hakel, or when is it a suffix deraisa? It started off as a suffix deraisa, and the belief went in. The Pri Megadim says maybe you should have to be machmer. He's talking about a related question. He says you have to be machmer because maybe the person will use the kli with a double harf. Double harf is machayil and shvach. It makes the ein binyamin into a binyamin. So you can't say it's ein binyamin, it's only Rabbanon because it could turn into a deraisa. And the Kveka says there's a machlokes rishonim.
They're not going to discuss plastic, right?
No, Pri Megadim is not discussing plastic. The Pri Megadim is talking about a case where it's a suffix and you have a clear it's ein binyamin. He says why don't we say suffix Rabbanon l'hakel? That's what he's talking about. We'll get to his case in a second. He's actually talking about. Rabbi Kveka says that there's machlokes rishonim whether a bli that's ein binyamin, does that mean that right now it's not edible, or does it mean that it's fine the way it is? But we know that it's in a condition that when it hits the next food, then it will be l'skam to the next food. It's a machlokes rishonim. Right now, if you were to take a bite out of the kli, would that bli be l'shvach or l'skam? Is it a ruined taste, or is it will only be ruined when it gets out and into the next food? Then it will ruin the next food. That's the machlokes rishonim. So he says maybe it should be totally on that. If you say that right now it's a good taste, but when it comes out it will ruin the next food. So right now it's a suffix deraisa. The thing you're dining on the thing that's in there. Have I gotten out the issue that's in there? Okay, that's Rabbi Kveka talks about that. Okay, what we're not going to talk about in Cheress is a bunch of other materials. Most of them are going to be in Halacha Ches, which is bone and wood and stone and rubber and bricks. That's for Halacha Ches. The mitzvah of China and porcelain enamel for Halacha Chav Gimel. That's where that's really where it is.
What's the story that it's puzzle when it goes out?
The blia degrades while it's sitting in the kli. So is it degrading to the point that it already doesn't taste good? Or no, but it became bad enough that if it hits into any other food, it's going to be lifted. Where it is now, it might still be acceptable. It's going to have to do something else. It's going to come out of the kli and hit into the next food.
Like Dam Shapir's or one of Shapir's changes the characteristic.
I don't know.
Is it totally non-food right now, or it's not non-food? It's just not so good tasting, so it's going to be left out. So,
okay, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. That's clear. Okay. And the last, good. Okay, and the last material we're not going to talk about is glass, which is at the end of Tuftanaf. Okay. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the Mishmur says something here. It's like a side point, but it's an obvious point, which is the din here is you have a kli that was not kosher, so you have to put it away, and you have to lock it up, and whatever you have to do with the kli. So Mishmur says we're assuming that the kli was used. It came that was nishtamis and chametz. He says, well, what happens if you go and you buy, if you have a new kli that was never used beforehand? Okay, so that's where he chooses to talk about that. Last one talk about it, and we assume that if you buy a new kli, you go into the store and you buy a new kli, you can assume that new kli was never used, because that's the normal thing. It wouldn't be used, and therefore you don't have to kasher the kli. You're allowed to use it as you have to toilet, but you don't have to kasher. But the Mishmur says if you buy a kli from a guy's home. Okay, you buy it on eBay. Okay, you buy a kli. Then you assume that the kli was used, or there's a potential that it was used, and therefore you have to kasher the kli aside from the tefillah keilim that you have to put. Okay, so I wanted to mention two situations that we have that are negated to us. The first one is many years ago, about 20 years ago, Radulski went to the Farberware plant and spent some hours sitting in the Farberware plant to see, because there were persistent rumors that they smeared the pots with lard when they shined the pots. So he went to the plant he spent a couple hours there trying to understand what's going on. Is it really true? To see what was going on, and he found the following. And I have something to give you a write-up of what he said, of what he found. The inside and the outside of the pot, I meant to bring one, but I forgot to. The inside and the outside of the pots are done differently. The inside of the pot is just bark. There's like a stainless steel. Like steel wool. Just screw up on the inside. There's no liquid or anything that's put into there. There is something very early in the process. Very early in the process, there are oils put into there, but then it's burnt at over 1,000. If I remember, over 1,000 degrees. But later, when they're finished and the pot is already formed, that's not a problem. Those early bleeds is not a problem. But then they take the pot, they have to polish it. If the inside of the pot is polished, at that time,
what do you mean?
The part where the food goes, just with like a steel wool, without anything on, just a scraping, just to get any chips, and that's not a problem. On the outside, they want to make it shinier. There, they put a thing that contains animal fat, obviously, which is treif. Well, the animal fat is treif. And they rub it on the outside. What he found, first of all, is that the animal fat is, I forgot the percent, you'll see inside, a small percentage of the actual mixture. The mixture itself that they put on, yes, it has animal fat in it, but it has all kinds of other chazara in it. And he said, okay, wrong word. So he asked one of the people in the plant to taste it. He said, what does that stuff taste like? What is the finished liquid? So the guy tasted it, and it says putrid. And then Radulski tasted it, once the guy tasted it, he concurred with the guy that in fact the stuff was not royal. In addition, Radulski, this is a classic Radulski, he made a cheshbon as to how much fat they put onto the outside of the pot. And then he figured out how much of the cream is actually fat. And then he figured out, so how much blia could there be inside the pot? There's this much isser, and then if you use the pot, it's always, the blia that would come out of the side of the pot would always be buffalo a zillion times The blia any blia that could possibly be in there would be buckled into the food that you cook, even if you cook the tiniest amount of food in the pot.
Is there a big difference is outside or inside?
That's the last point. Yes, that's the last point. But so the blias that are going to come are always buckled, which is a rule of also l'shtamish b'shefa. A kli that if the blia is so small that it will always be buckled into what you're using it in, then somebody from home they don't have to kashrus at all. In fact, the Mechaber holds like that. We usually are makmir for the Taz and the Shas that say it has to also be Ein Binyamin. It has to be Oslu Shams Shefa and Ein Binyamin. Of course, it is in this case because it was done in the factory however many weeks ago. And the last point was that this stuff is put on cold, but the buff and it's put on the outside. But all this rubbing, all the buffing that you're doing to it, builds up heat. It does this to over 200 degrees. The pot gets very hot, so it does build up heat. But Rabbi said the second they stop doing the polishing, the second they finish, it cools down. So he thought that should be treated like a klisheni. It's a thing that the Tosfos says that klisheni is the characteristic of a klisheni is that the fanas on the Kashrus, it's cooling down. Over here, he said, you see how much it's cooling down. That the second you take the machine off of it, it cools in a second. It's not really retaining.
You're not washing that heat that comes from friction is my layer. It's not mentioned in the Torah, really.
No, it's not. It's assumed that it is. Well, it's a question whether it's like a klimishin or not. But if it's hot, you just assume that there's a blia. But he wants to say that this has a blia, but it's being treated like a klisheni, like ivri, which would only be k'nei klipa. His point is here, and since it's only k'nei klipa, except for the outside, it won't work to the inside. Okay, that's one thing. The second thing is something we know more about, which is the pre-season cast iron pots, which I brought one here. I haven't yet finished with it, so Mr. will continue with it next week, which is like this. When you make pots out of cast iron, when you make a pot out of cast iron, first of all, it will rust if you don't do something to it. And second, in addition to that, it could rust. It will, if you wanted to, the real characteristics of a pot, one of the characteristics of a cast iron pot is that it's non-stick. And it's non-stick because of the oils that are absorbed into it. So if you don't do what they call season it, if you don't season it, it won't have that property of being non-stick. So you have to season a pot. So you could buy a pot that's not seasoned, and they put like a wax coating on it. The wax coating is not edible. It's not a problem. And then you melt that off and then season it yourself. But most people are lazy and would rather just buy that the company season it themselves.
Season your own cast iron yourself?
Yes. No. I'll tell you how you season in a second. But you could buy a pot that has no seasoning. It comes gray. You could buy it by itself raw, but it's coated with a wax just to keep it from rusting. And then you melt that wax off, and then you can season it yourself. How do you season the pot? You spray or pour a thin layer of oil or fat or butter or something like that onto the pan, and then you stick it into a warm oven for a couple of hours, like 300-400 degrees for a couple of hours. That's to get it started. That's like the beginning of the seasoning. Then you do that many, many times, and over time it builds up a nice, good amount of blia into the pot, and it gets this nice flat color that's considered really seasoned, and then your pot is seasoned for good. Okay? Now, once you season your pot, you're not allowed to wash it. Okay, I'm not saying that. You're not allowed to wash it with soap. Okay, if you wash it with soap, you're going to get the seasoning out of it, and you have to season it again. So you just rinse it with water, or you use like a scrubber just to get the end off of it. But that's how much they're counting on the blia being in there, that you're not allowed to wash this thing with soap. Okay, so we always talk about Hagal's Keilim, and we talk about theoretical blias that no one has ever heard of or ever seen. Right? We just do it like Cheress a custom, but in a cast iron pot, supposedly, we'll find out more later, but supposedly, the blia is right there. If you wash this with soap, you're going to get something out of there, and it's not going to work the way it was supposed to be. And it's like mamish, like real blia, like it's supposed to be. So
for commercial or people using it?
No, this is a house. This is for a house. I bought when I want to.
You have?
This is a home that I bought from Target. Yeah, this is for regular people. I bought it instead of as a frying pan. I thought my wife, when I'm finished with this whole project, would have more use from this than from a frying pan. Okay, that's why I bought it. But it's a frying pan. You can buy it as a frying pan or as a whole pot. This is a frying pan. This is not a frying pan. This is the goes skillet. It's heavy. It goes over 2 burners. That's what it's supposed to be. It's like a big open frying pan. Okay. So now,
your stove is small enough.
So now the first question was, I said to Rabbi Schwartz, tell me, because if you feel this, you don't feel any bad. I assumed you were going to feel it. Now what the company does, they do it for you. This is pre-season. I mean, they're spraying a spray onto it. The box says that they use vegetable oil, but they spray something onto it, and you would expect that you'd feel something, which you don't. Okay. You can feel it if you want. You don't feel anything on here. So I said,
Give me a paper towel. Maybe I'll go back and forth a few
They're on
times.
the wrong side. I saw the
it's both sides. It's two sides. You can use it on both sides. You can use it on both sides, but it's the same thing. What?
That's for broiling.
That's for broiling, right? Correct. It's two sides. So first, I said to Rabbi Schwartz, what do you think? Do you think that am I mechuyev to wash it with soap? Meaning, when you kasher kli, you have to get rid of the be'en first. So I know that there's be'en that I can get out of here. If I wash this with soap, it says in the direction, don't dare wash this thing with soap. So if I wash this scrub it with soap or stick it in the dishwasher, I'm gonna get out be'en.
That's because soap or water?
Yeah, no, soap. Okay, soap, that's what it says. It doesn't talk about
Soap and oil mixes with oil, right?
the soap.
Soap is an emulsifier. Take out the...
No, that's correct. So I said, should I be mechuyev to wash this thing with soap to get the be'en, as if to get the be'en out? So Rabbi Schwartz, he says no. He says if you feel a oily, covering on it, that you have to get rid of it. Otherwise, that's a din of hagol that takes out blias. It's like we're being smarter. We're saying now we finally banged into a real blia, and now we're gonna come to how to get rid of it. We finally
Soap is going to take out. I mean, soap is the one thing that's out there.
So we would assume that was my question. I said if the soap can take it out, should we treat it?
They can't use soap. They're telling you this be'en.
Right, but so I said, very Schwartz touched it as you can. So you don't feel anything on here. You don't feel any be'en on the.
Because when it's soap, how do you feel be'en? Because there's a level. It's on level. If they know how to do it very, very well level,
That's
then you're not going to feel the be'en.
another property of cast iron pots is that they are not smooth. They have lots of bumps in them because that has to do with the way the food. You'll see yourself that it's not at all a smooth surface. I mean, in certain spots, there's a certain here's a bad spot that's just smooth, but really it's not smooth. So okay, you can try it, and we'll try your thing. We'll try to run tissue over it.
So what do you say that?
So he said, so that's not, even though you could get it out, that's a blia. When you could get out, even they're telling you to get out with soap, but we know the din of how to get the blia out. You put it into boiling water, it's going to get it out. That part I have not told you. That's mitzvah for next week, is to try to stick it into boiling water and see what happens. Something should be coming out of this thing, but we should expect to see oil coming out.
So he's touching it up as a blia, not as a be'en.
Right, what does a be'en mean? Something that you would notice on the outside, and a blia is something that's absorbed inside of it. It's cooked at 3-4 degrees.
This is a unique thing. You can't take the regular blia because they purposely, like you're saying, they purposely do something like that it doesn't go all the way in.
Oh, no, it does, because they say when you use the pot, before you use it in a regular pot, you can put your food into it. You have to heat it up first, the way I read was, and you'll see the oil like coming to the surface, like it'll come out, like it'll be like, wait there, and then you put your food in. Now that's nice and hot, and you see your oil, it's there waiting to come out, not that it's on the outside. You're saying it's like, as if sprayed, like hiding, you know what I mean?
No, they say you'll actually see the oil when you heat this thing up.
That's one of the places that, yes, it'll start to get that kind of, so we're going to try it.
So the more you use it, the more you lose.
No, because every time you cook with it, you're re-seasoning it. You're putting more in, you're taking in, you're giving back. So when you put something else in, you put a piece of fish onto this, because the fish...
They should fill up with wine, Javier, they should fill up with wine so they don't lose any more wine. Water is
okay, now, Rabbi first had a big chiddush about this kind of a pot. In Mitzvah next thing, I'm going to clarify with him what he said before I take over what he said. It was a big chiddush, okay? And now, the one last shot I'll do is, because I'm going to try to kasher this week. In Mitzvah, I'm going to try to kasher and see what happens. Is how you're supposed to kasher it. How would you kasher it? Let's say it has straight blia. So it's worth noting this. The Shach brings in tough... Kuf Chaf Al, which is the other simon about Hagol's Keilim, he brings another shita that we're not used to. Okay, it's just worth knowing this machlokes. The din is that if you cook a piece of meat, if the tarfus is a solid piece and it goes onto the clay, you have to do libun. You can't do Hagol, you have to do libun. I suppose if you did a liquid on here, you would do Hagol. What's the criteria that we're looking for? So the din is that the criteria is whether it's a liquid or a solid. If it's a solid, like a piece of meat, then you do libun. If it's a liquid, then you do hagol. But if you cooked up a pot of a soup, then you do hagol. The Shach brings a Ramami Panu who says oil. It's a liquid. The Ramami Panu says it doesn't tell whether it's a liquid or a solid. It depends whether the Isser has direct contact with the Kli or the Isser has indirect contact with the Kli. So usually that's liquid and solid. If you put a piece of meat, then the Isser has direct contact. If you make a soup, then the meat is just floating around in the soup, but what's having the direct contact is the water. That's how the Ramami Pana learns the difference between a solid and a liquid. Okay? And the nafkamina is, what happens if the liquid itself is the Isser? What happens if you put a tray, you cook something up in a tray from oil? You go to McDonald's and the oil itself is what's treif, not the French fries. The oil is treif. Or in our case, the thing that they sprayed onto this was a liquid, but that was the Isser. There wasn't any other Isser. The Isser itself was a liquid. So according to the Rami Pana, then a kli like this would need libun. Okay, but that's not the din. The din is not what the Rami Pana. The din is that depends if it's a liquid or if it's a liquid or solid. What went onto here was a liquid. That's what you put onto this. You spray on something onto it. And therefore, the kli, the way to kasher it, even though there was nothing else, that was all that was put onto the kli, the way you kasher it is to give it hagol. That's what it needs. That's the kind of kasher that it needs is hagol. Even though it was put into the fire, this was put into a hot oven. They did it. They put this into a hot oven.
The CRC put something else in there. The carrot pieces probably need bleeding go.
Okay. So that's of course from Mom and Pana. So the CRC was telling it's a mistake. Yes, that's a mistake because it's not. It's when you do even though the Isser is in the. Even the Isser is in direct contact, but the Isser was in a liquid form, and that's a muscle you haven't said it, but I do not believe that's correct. And as in Mitzvah Hashem, the Mitzvah Hashem will try to finish the halacha next week, but I will try to we'll talk to Rabbi first to hear what his chiddush, which we've heard rumors of what he said, and I want to ask him a question about the be'en also, whether he thinks that you have to get rid of the be'en first, and I will try to kashrus also and see what happens. Okay, thank you.